Hello, Matrix. So today we're going to be having a look at the poem Fern Hill by Dylan Thomas. Now, Dylan Thomas was a Welsh poet remembered for his musical language and playful humour and underlying sadness. And he was born in Swansea in 1914 and died rather young in 1953, in New York. And Fern Hill was published in 1946, and it draws on Thomas's own childhood, his childhood holidays spent at his aunt's farm in Fern Hill in, I'm never going to be able to pronounce this correctly, Carmarthenshire. It's definitely not correct. Well, this farm was in the countryside, and it provided him with a lot of freedom and joy and a deep sense of connection and nature. And the poem really does look back on those carefree days with a huge sense of nostalgia. Thomas celebrates the innocence of childhood, the beauty of the natural world, and the feeling of being protected yet completely free. And at the same time, he reflects on the passing of time. So his childhood joy, he realizes, was very much temporary. And growing up, it brings a painful awareness of this loss. And the central themes that will be included in the poem are the themes of childhood joy and innocence, so the delight of being young and carefree. It will look at harmony with nature, so the countryside feels very much alive, almost like a companion to our speaker, and it's very much described that way in the poem. He'll look at the loss of innocence, so the fact that childhood ends, much like being exiled from Eden. We'll go into that a little bit more as we analyze our poems further. He also looks at the power of time, time being quite godlike, a force, if you wish, that both gives joy and takes it away. And he also looks at the theme of nostalgia, a longing for a vanished world of youth. I hope that you enjoy the poem today. It is a very long one, so get ready to strap in and be prepared to take lots of notes as we go along. Before I actually start analysing the poem line by line, I would just like to draw your attention to the form and structure of our poem. So this poem consists of 6 stanzas, each comprising 9 lines. There's also a very strict syllabic count in each line, which is repeated in each stanza. But despite the strict syllabic count and rhythm, there is no specific form to this poem. The poem is supposed to be very song-like in its rhythm. And the poem can be divided into 2 parts. So the first 3 stanzas are very much related to the poet's experience as a child, and the last 3 stanzas focus on the awakening in the child, which signifies the loss of innocence. And just with regard to the tone of our poem, so our tone is very reflective throughout the poem. The poet is especially reflective when he focuses on the transition from child to adult. The tone also transcends to one that is joyful, fervent, and emotional when our speaker praises youth and innocence. And in the final stanza, the tone changes to one of melancholy as the speaker focuses on the loss of childhood. We could also say that our tone is very nostalgic as the poet, throughout the poem, reflects on his time at Fern Hill, on the happy memories that he had there when he was a child. So our poem begins with the word now. This use of present tense is important because the speaker, now an adult, is reflecting on his past. He recalls, as I was young and easy under the apple boughs. The word young captures his innocence and inexperience. What Thomas is doing is he's emphasizing the carefree nature of youth. He was yet naive, without any worries, and this was a time in his life where freedom seemed completely natural. The phrase easy also deepens that sense of effortlessness and lightness that comes with childhood. Next we have the line about the lilting house, and happy as the grass was green. The word lilting means singing merrily. So by personifying the house in this way, Thomas makes it feel alive, almost magical and filled with emotion. The simile, happy as the grass was green, works in a simple but rather striking way as well. Just as the greenness of the grass was completely undeniable to our speaker, so too was the happiness of his childhood. And then the writer says, time let me hail and climb. Here time itself is personified. Time becomes a godlike or parental force granting permission to the child. Unlike adulthood, where time is often oppressive and pressing, here it is gentle and generous, an ally that allows freedom. And this captures the child's sense of happiness. Life is not yet bound by time's restrictions, but instead released into play and exploration. So altogether, Matrix, these lines weave a memory of childhood where the natural world feels, as I said, animated, time is a friend, and the speaker remembers himself as being free and innocent and altogether without any worries. Yet underneath lies the adult awareness that this freedom is very much temporary, something already slipping into the past. Our first stanza continues with the lines, golden in the heydays of his eyes. The word golden carries connotations of something precious and full of value, and it also subtly links to autumn, where leaves turn gold, hinting at the passing of time, which is very important to this poem. The phrase heydays of his eyes tells us that this was the best of times for our poet. This was when life was vibrant and full of happy memories. Next we have the line, and honoured among wagons, I was the prince of apple towns. Here the speaker describes feeling really celebrated and recognised by those around him, especially the inhabitants of the farm world. And the metaphor of being a prince of apple towns shows how elevated he felt in his youth. That farm and its orchards were his domination, a kingdom where he felt important and almost like royalty. And then Thomas deepens this royal imagery with, and once below a time I lordly had the trees and leaves. Again, a metaphor is at work. The speaker sees himself during his childhood as being like a lord in charge of nature itself. Childhood seems to have given Thomas a sense of majesty, as though he ruled over the landscape. And lastly, the rivers of windfall light work as a metaphor where he is focusing on the natural beauty of Fern Hill, and he is describing the way that light on the river seems to, light is compared to a river that is overflowing with riches and filling his childhood with complete splendor. So altogether, the description paints the landscape as this complete paradise. To the child, this was no ordinary farm. It was a world where he felt honoured, celebrated, and, as I said earlier, he felt like royalty. Moving on to stanza 2. So stanza 2 begins with, and as I was green and carefree, famous among the barns. So we've got the word green again, and here the word green captures more than just a colour. It symbolises youth and inexperience. And it's a reminder that as a child, the speaker had no real problems or concerns. His innocence was bound up with nature. Just as grass and leaves are green, so too was the stage of his life. And the phrase carefree, famous among the barns suggests a delight of being young and at home in his surroundings. On the farm, he was known and celebrated and full of joy. Childhood itself is almost personified as a time filled with singing and play and imagination. Next, we have the lines, and about the happy yard and singing as the farm was home. The use of happy reinforces how idyllic the speaker's time at Fern Hill was. The farm was not simply a place to live, but a home filled with joy, warmth, and belonging. The speaker then reflects in the sun that is young once only. This metaphor is crucial. Just as the sun rises only once each day, youth too happens only once. Childhood is brief, while adulthood seems to stretch on endlessly. This line captures the fleeting nature of that perfect time when everything seemed radiant. Then we hear, time let me play and be, golden in the mercy of his means. Again, time is personified as being generous and kind, like a benevolent parent who allows the child to enjoy life without intrusion from the harshness of the real world. And the phrase golden in his mercy conveys the sense that these childhood days were a precious gift, something granted out of time's kindness. The stanza continues with, and green and golden, I was huntsman and herdsman. The phrase green and gold again ties childhood to nature. Childhood is it's something that is precious, it is golden. And the speaker compares himself to both a huntsman and a herdsman. Sometimes he might have imagined himself as a hero, blowing his horn and chasing wild animals, and at other times he might have imagined himself to be a shepherd tending to the cattle. This metaphor highlights the child's sense of play and power and belonging in the natural world. And the line, "The calves sang to my horn, the foxes on the hills barked clear and cold," expresses how the animals also seem to join in on his play. Then we hear, "And the Sabbath rang slowly in the pebbles of the holy stream." Now, this reference to the Sabbath is a biblical allusion. We'll see quite a few of those in this poem, actually. And it creates a mood of reverence and deep respect. It suggests that nature in this moment feels like a church or a temple to our speaker. Even the sound of the water over the pebbles in the stream becomes like church bells ringing. And the imagery also connects the natural world to a spiritual experience. The streams seem to sing hymns of praise to God, their flowing water echoing like a choir. And for the child, the temple was not made of stone, but of fields, streams, and skies. This was a place that Thomas really worshipped in his youth. And time here seems to slow down. It's stretched out by the holiness of the moment. The speaker recalls feeling as though he was worshipping in the temple of nature, where every sound became sacred. Even the stream itself seems to be a holy altar to him, and the sound of the water running is almost like a hymn to his ears. But I think most importantly, the idea of time going slowly is important. The speaker at this point in the poem is not yet under the pressures and restrictions of time like we experience in our adulthood. Moving on to stanza 3, we are almost halfway through the poem Matrix. The stanza opens with, "All the sun long it was running, it was lovely." So the sun is personified here, and it's described as running. This reflects how autumn days are shorter and the sun rushing across the sky. Yet for the child it was simply lovely, a word repeated often in the poem to capture the pure, unfiltered joy of this memory. And the hayfields high as the house is a simile and an example of hyperbole. Just like children tend to exaggerate, so is Dylan Thomas sort of mimicking that childhood exaggeration when he speaks about the scale of the harvest. The hay bales seem so large and abundant that they tower like houses, capturing, as I said, this child's perspective where everything felt larger than life. We then hear the tunes from the chimneys, "It was air." The detail is magical. Even the chimneys seem to sing. This suggests that everything in Thomas's childhood, in his childhood world, was alive and harmonious. And the reference to air connects to purity and clarity. Life felt clean and beautiful and completely unspoiled. Next, playing lovely and watery. This playing dominates our speaker's memory. It was so joyful that he didn't notice discomforts like rain or cold. And the description watery may also suggest how fluid and shifting children's memories are. And they tend to become a little bit blurred as we grow older. And the stanza continues with, "And fire green as grass." Here we have another striking simile. Fire is compared to grass. And this unusual imagery, I think, really captures how vivid his childhood was, how the natural world seemed alive with colour and of magic. And stanza 3 continues with, "As I rode to sleep, the owls were bearing the farm away." Here night arrives and the speaker falls asleep. And the farm seems to disappear with him into dreamland. And again, just referencing childhood imagination, Thomas as a child imagines that the farm is carried away by the owls at night. And again, this just creates a dreamlike quality, as though the familiar world dissolves into the imagination. And in the lines, "All the moon long I heard blessed among stables," the phrase "all the moon long" reinforces the nighttime setting, stretching time out under the glow of a beautiful moonlight. And the word blessed carries a religious undertone again, but it reflects on how the child felt in those moments. Thomas felt incredibly blessed, happy, fortunate, and free, as though his very existence was sacred when he was on Fern Hill. And he recalls the nightjars flying with the ricks and the horses flashing in the dark. At night, the speaker hears the sound of nightjars, the nocturnal birds, and the stirring of horses in the stables. These details ground his dreamlike memory in the living world of the farm at night. But the description ends with a shift. He talks about flashing into the dark. The image suggests quite a sudden light breaking into the darkness, and this is very symbolic ending to his childhood sleep. The flash can be read as the light of awareness, signaling the loss of paradise, freedom, innocent bliss. and childhood dream-like world is slowly starting to slip away, giving way to a more harsher reality. Stanza 4 begins with a turning point, and then to awake. So the word "and" signals a real shift, and awake introduces a new awareness. Up to now, the speaker has been lost in this dreamlike beauty of childhood, but here he is jolted back into consciousness. The farm is also personified as a traveller returning at dawn, clothed in dew. This gives the sense that the world has completely shifted overnight and returned in the morning light, renewed yet changed. The innocence of childhood is starting to fade, and it's replaced with the awareness that time has moved forward. It is not as slow as it used to be. It is not as kind as it used to be. And the reference to the cock on his shoulder, well, the rooster is both literal and symbolic over here. Literally, it signals morning, so cock crows in the morning. But the end of the night, but it's also signaling the end of the night and the end of dreams. It's also symbolically related to the biblical story of Peter's betrayal of Jesus. So just as the rooster crowed to mark this betrayal, here too it signals that time has betrayed the speaker. Childhood, which was once a paradise of freedom, is very much slipping away. And at the same time, the rooster also represents innocence, a creature of purity waking the world at dawn. So this tension between innocence and betrayal underscores the stanza's tone. The child's world, which was once untouched, is now marked by this inevitability of change. In this moment of awakening, the speaker begins to recognize that time, which was once incredibly generous and kind, is not always merciful. Its passage leads not only to growth, but also to a lot of loss. The stanza continues with the lines, "Shining, it was Adam and Maiden." So this is once again a biblical allusion, but it's a biblical allusion to the Garden of Eden, where Adam and Eve lived in innocence before the fall. By comparing Fern Hill to Eden, Thomas emphasizes just how idyllic, pure, and beautiful his childhood felt. It was an absolute paradise, free of corruption, full of wonder. But at the same time, this illusion brings in a sense of loss and regret, because just like Adam and Eve's innocence was temporary, so too was the speaker's. And the phrase "the sky gathered again" conveys the cycle of time. The day is now drawing to a close, the sky is darkening, and his childhood is ending. And finally, the line "and the sun grew round that very day" recalls a moment where the writer becomes aware of this fleeting childhood. It symbolizes not just a literal day on the farm, but also the turning point of his own life. The sun completing its circle represents the speaker's awareness that childhood is over. He is growing up, he is no longer a child, but entering the wider, harsher world of adulthood. And in these lines, the joyous memory of Fern Hill becomes rather bittersweet. It is recorded as a paradise, yet one that could not last forever. In these lines, the poet continues to compare Fern Hill to the Garden of Eden, and he starts with, "So it must have been after the birth of the simple light." So he's recalling the biblical story of creation again. He's referring to the very first light in Eden and the dawn of the world. And he's essentially linking his childhood memories to such a cosmic beginning because he's elevating Fern Hill to the level of paradise. When he mentions the first spinning place, this phrase is referring to Earth itself turning on its axis. And we also see the use of onomatopoeia in the word whinnying. What he's trying to do here is capturing the sound of horses, and he's again just bringing the scene to life. He's trying to get us as the reader to really picture the beauty of Fern Hill, and for us to see it as the paradise that he saw it to be. And here Thomas is really just fusing childhood memory, nature, and biblical allusion into a vision where Fern Hill becomes not just a farm, but a kind of Edenic temple, a place where creation itself seems to begin anew each day. Moving on to stanza 5, our poet starts with the lines, "And honoured among foxes and pheasants by the gay house." The animals themselves seem to love and honour our speaker, and this personification of nature just reinforces once again how Thomas as a child felt celebrated in his world, almost at one with the creatures of Fern Hill as well. And the gay house suggests joy and laughter in a place filled with really quite light-hearted happiness. Under the new made clouds and happy as the heart was long, this phrase in particular suggests a freshness and renewal, as though each day was created anew. And the simile, happy as the heart was long, captures an overflowing joy. It's like Thomas's heart was filled to the brim with delight when he was young and staying at Fern Hill. And then we have the line, in the sun born over and over. Here the repetition of the sun rising day after day creates the sense of endlessness. To Thomas, the child, time felt infinite. Summers seemed to stretch on forever, and there was no thought of limitation. And the word heedless shows that he ran freely without any concerns or worries. Carefree, he lived only in the moment, untouched by responsibility or the awareness of time. And he also says, my wishes raced through the house high hay. So his dreams and imagination were really boundless, as if his wishes could come true as quickly as the haystacks grew higher. And we've got alliteration with the H sounds. So we've got house, high, hay. And this really conveys this like breathless excitement, a rush of energy that matches the intensity of this youthful desire and wonder. So together these lines highlight the unrestrained joy of childhood, a world of laughter, imagination, and endless days where nature and time seem to conspire in his favour. The stanza continues, and we have the lines, and nothing I cared at my sky blue trades that time allows. This line captures the essence of carefree youth. The speaker didn't care about time passing. Instead, he was absorbed in the sky blue trades. These are his activities of childhood, which are playful and imaginative. And to him, time seemed kind and loving, granting him mornings filled with joy. And time is personified again and described as turning tunefully, almost like a musician. The child hears its music as morning songs, which are symbols of freshness and vitality. Yet the phrases "so few" hints at how brief these mornings were. And this is starting to foreshadow that conclusion that childhood is very much fleeting. And we've got the green and golden children in the next line. So we've got green and gold coming up again. And this relates to the fact that while the children are still innocent and naive, they will eventually follow time out of grace. So this echoes the biblical story again of Adam and Eve, who were cast out of Eden. And childhood is compared to paradise, a state of innocence and joy, but of course that cannot last forever. And the symbolism is powerful. Leaving childhood is like leaving Eden. The speaker moves from a world of perfect union with nature into an awareness of reality, which brings a huge amount of regret, sadness, and the recognition that freedom has been lost. And this marks one of the poem's turning points, where innocence gives way to experience and joy becomes tinged with sorrow. And at last we move on to our final stanza of this very long poem. So in stanza 6, the speaker reflects again on his carefree childhood. He says, nothing I cared in the lamb-white days that time would take me. So the phrase lamb-white days symbolizes innocence and purity, reinforcing the child's carefree attitude. Yet there's also a shift here. Time, once generous, is now personified as something that takes from him. What was once positive begins to feel like loss. Time is starting to rob him of his childhood. And the lines in the moon that is always rising further reminds us that time never stops. The moon rises again and again, marking the continuous passage of time. The child didn't notice this inevitability. He lived without awareness of endings, but as an adult, he's very much aware. And finally, in the last lines of the poem, the tone shifts to deep regret. The speaker says, and awake to the farm forever fled from the childless land. So the alliteration of the F in farm forever fled emphasizes the sense of freedom lost. The farm, which was once a symbol of innocence and joy, is now gone forever. He wakes to the reality of adulthood, and childless land seems barren, fallow, and joyless compared to the paradise of his youth. And our speaker cries out, "Oh, as I was young and easy in the mercy of his means." So the word "oh" is a cry of sorrow, filled with longing for what has been lost. Time is again personified here. In youth, he felt carried gently in time's mercy, but now looking back, he sees that time is never merciful. It is only fleeting. And in the lines, "Time held me green and dying," the line captures the paradox at the heart of the poem. As a child, he was green, he was full of life and growth, but even then he was also dying, because time was already carrying him towards the end of innocence. And time held him in its grasp all along, nurturing, but of course also destroying. And finally, we have the lines, "Though I sang in my chains like the sea." So the simile here conveys both beauty and despair. Like the sea, his song is vast and powerful, but he is also chained. He is a prisoner of time. And the image captures the paradox of memory. He still sings of his joyful childhood, but he does so from the bondage of adulthood and the knowledge that freedom is gone. And so our poem closes with a profound tension, that there is the beauty of childhood, and that beauty of childhood should be celebrated, but of course it should also be mourned, because it is forever lost to the chains of time. Well done, Matrix. It's a very, very long poem, but I hope that this video was useful and that you have a better understanding of the poem.